Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Dewey. I'm Director of Marketing here at Soil Mats. Today, I have four people with me. I have Cody Harrison with Farmats. He is our distributor. I have Ryan Zook, our product manager. And then I have our two presenters today. I have Michael Meyerhofer, and I have Joseph Irwin Jr., our general manager at Soil Mats. And Michael's a representative for ADS Tile Pipe. I'll let Joe and Michael kind of further introduce themselves, take over, and then Cody will follow up with a recap at the end on the demo days in the next couple of weeks in Australia that you'll be seeing him and Ryan Zook in person. So I'll let you guys take it from here, Joe and Michael.
Perfect. Nope. Thanks, Brian. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Once again, my name is Michael Meyerhofer. I'm actually a business development manager for Advanced Drainage Systems. So we're the largest tile manufacturer here in the States. So been with them for about 8 years. Prior to that, I was actually farming with an uncle and actually own a Solmax plow myself that we used on our own ground. And we purchased it about 12 years ago. So once again, thanks for having us. Joe, feel free to introduce yourself as well.
Sure. So my name is Joe Irwin. I'm the general manager at SoilMax here in Indiana. I've been using the plow since 1997. My dad and I bought the second plow that SoilMax produced. I farmed basically all my life. I took 4 years off for college, but fourth generation farmer here locally to where SoilMax is. I've been using the plow for 25 and a half years at this point. So started working at SoilMax in 2012 when the original owners sold to Ag Leader. They needed a general manager, and so I was looking for a job at that time, and it all kind of fell into place. So very happy to be here. Very happy to be presenting to all you good folks. I'm sure. I don't know. Did we describe? There's going to be chats going on, questions you can raise, that kind of stuff, off on the. It looks like the right-hand side to me.
Yeah, Joe, I just mentioned in the chat that
Okay.
Anybody that has questions, put them there. I'll make sure that they get answered, and I'll recite them to Michael and Joe. Also, keep track of the polls. We'll start adding some polling information to kind of better understand your guys' needs, and so kind of watch those two things as we go along.
Yeah, that's a good point. And myself and Joe, we've done several different webinars throughout the last several years. So we can take this any angle you want. So we kind of keep it naturally. We got a presentation, but we also can kind of do a little bit more informal presentation and go down different directions as needed, just because we realize that this may be a newer practice for everybody that's on this webinar.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Stop us at any point. We'd rather do that than get halfway through the presentation. You have a question on slide 2. So
Yep.
Feel free to get a hold of Brian and get us stopped.
Yeah. So to jump right into it, the easiest way of explaining essentially what subsurface drainage is start picturing your soil and your soil profile as a sponge. So what I mean by that is if you take just a regular kitchen sponge that you'd buy at a convenience store, when it's saturated, completely saturated, and not having subsurface drainage, it's essentially saying your next rainfall event, you're going to have a runoff situation. That's because that sponge or your ground cannot accept any more moisture. When we incorporate subsurface drainage, we're essentially constantly squeezing that sponge and allowing for that next rainfall event to be captured in your soil. One other thing to note is like your voided spaces in that sponge, that's a positive for when we have subsurface drainage, meaning those voided spaces, that's introduction of more oxygen, better root development, more microbial activity, and all those things kind of stack on top of one another to essentially get you a higher yield. Once again, without subsurface drainage, those void spaces are filled with excess moisture. So as we incorporate drainage tubing and subsurface drainage, we're constantly squeezing that sponge, and that's allowing us to get rid of just the excess moisture. So once again, thinking of that sponge, once you constantly squeeze that, it still has a damp effect to it. That's because we're just getting rid of excess moisture. We're not getting rid of the plant available moisture needed for your plant to continuously to thrive. That's kind of just talking about subsurface drainage. That's the most common practice that we have with just introduction of drainage tubing. So as you can see in this graphic, there's a few different things to note. So one thing is like that conveyance line. So that's what we call your ag mains. So that's going to be your 6-inch, your 8-inch, your 10-inch lines. And those capture lines are what's going to be your 3-inch or your 4-inch. So 75 millimeter or 100 millimeter pipe. Those are strategically spaced and put on a different depth based on your soil type. So if you got a higher clay content, naturally we have to have those capture lines a little closer. If you have more sandier ground, we can extend those out. Once again, the depth range is going to be kind of like at a 1 meter level. So you might have 10 meters apart and 1 meter down, in your kind of clayer ground or more clay ground. When you get a little bit more sandy, you can extend that out, but still maintain that same depth. We're just trying to manage your water table. That control or that release is essentially in ground that's relatively flat and you don't have an outlet or that waterway to actually get rid of that moisture. That's when we'd have to introduce some sort of lift station or essentially like a sump pump in your basement on steroids. So if you need to outlet at 6 feet deep, but your waterway only allows for a 3-foot outlet, you'd have to introduce that control/release figure that you're seeing on there. One thing to note, so that's just your traditional subsurface drainage. We do have a thing just called water control or subsurface irrigation. So a water control is essentially you're putting a stop log structure in. So in your growing seasons, when you want to hold back even more moisture, they come in 6-inch increments. And if you get a rainfall event, it actually spills over. So we're just putting a stop log in, and it's to increase your water table, hold back the nutrients that you do have in the soil profile. And then, like I said, once you have a rainfall event, it'll actually spill over. So you're not going to be detrimental to your crop at all. And then subsurface irrigation is essentially the same thing what you're looking here, but on the top side. So if you're looking at your screen, the very left side of your screen, you'd actually have an artificial water source, and you'd be pumping water back into the drainage system. So that's kind of just the different practices you may have. And this is kind of showing the top 10 reasons to tile. I kind of laugh when I say top 10 reasons because there's probably 1,000 reasons to tile, but these are the most common ones. Naturally, everybody wants to incorporate drainage to get your higher yield. What does it equate to? Here in the States, we see that 20 to 30% range. So that's after about 2 to 3 years of actually having your system implemented into your farming practice. Year 1, you may only have, say, a 7%. Year 2, you might have a 18%. And by year 3, that's when we're seeing that 25 to 30% increase in yield. A couple other, I'm calling them ancillary benefits, but they all kind of come into play of why you do get a higher yield is like a longer growing season. So a lot of times we have our heavier rainfall events in your early spring months, and that's essentially limiting you from getting in and planting your crop. Introduction of drainage, we remove that that issue in your farming practice. So naturally, you're going to have a longer growing season. We kind of talked about your healthier roots, that soil structure, and that erosion side. So all of that comes into play of when you start looking at that sponge and utilizing your soil as a natural filtration system in that voided space. That's why you get the healthier roots and that superior soil structure. And one thing to note is, like number 9, that higher land value. So it's a initial investment, not only on the plow side, but also the pipe and the practice of putting the pipe in the ground. But afterwards, just based on what your yields can do and eliminating your excess moisture, you naturally have a higher land value. And that most times greatly outweighs the upfront cost, wouldn't you say, Joe?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we were looking at some ground, my son and I, and it's not tiled, and it affected the price. I mean, it just naturally worked into it around here that if it's not tiled, it's not worth as much.
Yeah. And a lot of people say, okay, why does drainage do anything with weed control? It kind of goes back to being able to get in earlier and getting that foliar coverage. So that more consistent stand throughout your farm, and you get, better crop growing throughout the growing season. Just even your foliar coverage is going to improve your weed control. So I brought up, essentially, I'm just trying to get rid of your excess moisture, not trying to get rid of all moisture in your soil profile. And it kind of comes into play with these two graphics. So I'm going to jump back and forth a little bit, but essentially this is what it looked like before implementation of subsurface drainage. And this is the yield map after. And the reason I say that is this was actually done in a drought year. So we still actually had on corn a 27% increase in yield during a drought. And that kind of goes back to getting in earlier, getting your root development deeper, and that more consistent stand. All those things kind of come into play when we start talking about yield in a drought.
Mm-hmm. I remember one thing my dad mentioned back in the early 2000s when we'd been tiling for a few years at that point, and he got his first yield monitor that actually showed the map in the cab. So we'd had yield monitors since about, 95, 96, but didn't have the actual monitor with the display in the cab. And he said that when we did the tiled fields, he didn't want to look at the map anymore because it was just one color. We'd eliminated all the wet spots and all that stuff. I remember thinking, well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
We've got rid of all that bad areas and drowned out spots. So certainly the yield monitor is what drove the guy that started SoilMax to even bring plows to North America, to the U.S. from Canada.
Yeah.
Was he had been heavily involved in yield mapping, and he could see all the problems that other farmers had.
Yeah, and that's where you'll always hear different webinars, different YouTube videos, whatever it may be, is we took our worst ground, made it our best ground. Yep. Or, hey, my wet hole moved. Well, it really didn't move. It's literally, we said, we implemented drainage, and that took your yield of, let's say, 150 to 200, and your traditional 180 stayed at 180, right? Yep. So your worst ground now became your best ground, and then that's when you start investing more money and more resources into continuing, drainage, because then we're going to take our 180 back up to 220 type things. So,
and absolutely on our farm in 97, when we started tiling, our worst field, which we don't farm anymore, became our best field in 97 became our worst, because that guy wouldn't put tile in. We didn't own that ground.
Yeah.
And we started in our worst field. We only got 30 acres planted out of 40 though in 97. And within 3 years, that was our highest yielding field out of all. And it didn't even all get planted in 97. So it's incredible what putting your own tile in can do for you. Just absolutely mind boggling.
Yep. So everybody kind of says, okay, when I start investing in drainage, investing in purchase of a plow, purchase of pipe, when am I going to get my money back? Right. So it's kind of a weighted question, because there's several different variables that go into that. Commodity pricing, percent yield increase, what size pipe you're using, spacing. Because essentially, if you have tighter spacing, there's more pipe per acre, right? So your per acre cost is going to go up. Everything that we see here in the States, though, sub 7 years is a very positive ROI. But as you can see with current market conditions, utilizing the same spacing, same cost of product, just by taking corn from $3.50 to what we're seeing today, you immediately drop 2 years off. And then you could also go down to, say, a 4 year versus the 5, just by making your spacing a little bit wider and utilization of a smaller diameter pipe. As the diameters of pipes go up or down, that's what fluctuates the cost of that actual material. So don't expect you to really zoom in on all of this, but essentially it's just saying I didn't just take a number out of thin air and throw it on a presentation. There was a little bit of thought behind that, right? So we kind of, in this scenario, I did have different crop rotations. For this example, I had a corn soybean rotation, and I'm very conservative when it comes to your percent of yield increase year over year. once again, it kind of goes back to after 3 years, that's when you're running full bore. You know, you got that root development, you got those avenues for water to travel, increased oxygen. That's why we have that 25, 30% by year 3. But as you can see on here, like year 3, I had 16%, year 4, 19%, and we're still seeing a very good ROI. And there, you know, this took into account purchasing your own and some sort of salvage value to the equipment, etc. So this is just kind of showing, you know, implementation of a different diameter pipe and different spacing, what that did to, it's kind of hard to see, but essentially those groups of red numbers, and when it goes to the black, went from that 7 to the 5 years. Like I said, there's just, it's a weighted question of what ROI it truly means, because all of these additional variables. If you can tile more acres per year, naturally you're taking that machinery cost per acre down, which is a positive for you. And then we kind of talk about like break-even acres, a different angle of what to talk about. With 40-foot spacing, you know, the break-even acres of buying it versus hiring it out was only 54 acres. So at that point in time, it's kind of a no-brainer to buy it yourself versus hiring it. Market conditions, like we already talked about, that yield benefit and the spacing. One thing to kind of talk about, or I want to bring up with spacing, and I alluded to it in that first graphic, is why does the spacing matter? So everything draws as a V. So if you're at 1 meter depth, each direction of the tile line, left to right, is only going to draw, let's say, 15 feet. And if you have, I guess, 40-foot spacing, you're going to have a gap in there, right? So that's where that spacing comes into play. And you'll see that right away. If you kind of go in and put 100-foot spacing in, your yield map's going to show you if you were too far apart. At that point in time, you can kind of come in and split your lines. But what we see here in the States is a lot of pattern systems, I call it. So that's why you kind of have that consistent yield throughout the field. But I think when I first bought my plow, it was literally just to start running lines here and there to get rid of wet spots. When you do that, just keep in mind, if your wet spot's 100 feet wide, you still might have to have 3 lines in that 100 feet versus just 1 line. It's only going to draw so far. Here you go, Joe.
So does anybody have any questions for Michael just on general tile? You can throw them into the chat room. I don't see any more in there right now. So what I'm going to do is kind of present on SoilMax on the plows that you're going to see here in what, 2 or 3 weeks, I guess, is when they're going to be over to all you folks to do the field days. So the one thing I want to highlight, we make 3 different models. And so 2 of them attach to your tractor on a 3-point hitch. One of them attaches with just a standard tongue hitch, you know, with a hitch pin, and it has wheels on it that carries it. But what I want to highlight in this part of the presentation is it doesn't matter which of the 3 plows you purchase from FarmX, they all achieve and maintain grade exactly the same way. And the way we do that is by changing the pitch of the shank. And I added a couple of slides here. I'm gonna, yeah. So the one thing I want to highlight is with all 3 plows, if we need to come up in the soil profile, we're going to add hydraulic fluid from the tractor into those pitch cylinders up on top. And what that does is it rotates the shank and to where the nose of the shank is coming up. And so as we do that, it drifts up in the soil profile. Doesn't matter if it's on a 3-point hitch or the wheeled machine, because the wheels are going to be in float and the 3-point hitch is going to be in float. The depth is, again, achieved and maintained exactly the same on all 3 plows. And it's with those pitch cylinders rotating that shank. And you know, the opposite is true. If we would ever need to go down in the soil profile, which is kind of odd, we usually don't, because the ground pressure is pushing the plow down. You're usually trying to come up. But the same is true. We can let oil out of those cylinders. The front of the shank will go down. The back of the shank will be rotating back, and it's going to drift down in that soil profile. all this is going on with our great ag leader control system. You could be walking next to this and barely see those cylinders move. It's very, very small changes in those cylinders as we're going through the field once we've achieved that depth or grade that we need. So I'm going to go backwards real quick. Sorry, but I wanted to highlight what I was talking about when I talk about all three. So you can see each of these three have got those black pitch cylinders up on top. And that's what we're going to extend and retract to change the angle of the shank in the ground. The first plow you see on the left there is called our ZD48. It goes 48 inches in the ground or 1.2 meters. And that's from that's the deepest you can install that tile. And it's going to do, what's it going to do? The 80 and the 105 millimeter tile, 3 and 4 inch tile. That's all it's going to do. It's going to go to 1.2 meters, 105 millimeter tile. That's it. It's made to run mainly laterals, or for a smaller farm that's got smaller fields, smaller acreage, and that's the only size pipe they really need to install. That's going to go on virtually any category 2 or 3 narrow tractor. This is all dependent on weight. You're going to have something that weighs, in pounds. Something for this is going to be in that 12 to 14,000 pound range to get a good start, and front wheel assist. The middle plow there is
Hey, Joe and Michael, just sorry. We had a quick question here.
Sure.
Do you guys, so the question is, do you use gravel in your trench? Because it's been a common practice in the UK,
Yep.
and Europe and outside of North America.
So it's a great question. So we don't in North America, as a rule. When I was a kid, so how old am I? I'm 56. So in the 70s, we had some tile installed by a contractor, and they did put gravel on top of it, around some wet holes, things like that. We never saw, we even, the second time they count, we even put gravel all the way up to the top of the soil profile, and still the tile worked. But I mean, once we dug those up 5-10 years later, gosh, a lot of that air that we thought we were gaining with the gravel was still filled up with silt and soil. I mean, it in the end, you put your tile at the right spacing and just go every, let's say you go every 10 meters with your tile width. I don't know what you would need to be at, but just do the entire field consistently. As Michael alluded to in his presentation, those wet holes disappear. You end up not needing the gravel, in my opinion, North America. In the EU, they use a lot of it. And so we've actually developed an accessory boot, and we'll look at these boots here a little bit later. I don't have a picture of the one with the ag box, but we've got an aggregate box. So if you do want to install aggregate on top of it, we've got an option for that, and Farmex can ship that straight to you, and it works fine. So it's one of those questions. I don't think you need it. I've never installed any aggregate on my farm from 97 on, never have. But I know that there's a lot of people that use it, especially in the EU or Great Britain or UK. Michael, you can jump in here too.
Yeah. So there's two things I do want to note. So actually, pipe draws from the bottom. So the only thing you really gain by putting aggregate in your trench is essentially surface drainage. It's allowing that water to get through the soil profile, or I guess the aggregate in this case, faster. Just send that, well, not even 1 meter wide, really,
Right.
Trench. So outside of that, you're getting sidewall seepage and seepage from the bottom up effect. So that's just hydraulic pressure and how fast that can move through the soil profile. So unless you created a sheet of aggregate, which is not feasible, you don't really gain anything by doing that kind of drainage, in my opinion. So back to what Joe said, tighter spacing and a little bit maybe shallower, that'll eliminate the need for aggregate.
And to be blunt, it's a lot of work to put that aggregate in. I mean, it's not fun. I mean, but if you decide that's what you need, we do have we do have a solution for it. So if that doesn't answer your question, go ahead and flag us again, but I'll keep moving forward.
We got
a couple more questions here.
We got 3 more questions coming in.
Okay.
Go ahead, Cody.
So Philip is just asking, most of our waterlogging is from draining of the higher ground to a low site. He's asking, can we put interceptor tiles in to alleviate this without the need of multiple tiles?
So you might have to rephrase that a little bit for me. Let me pull up the chat here and I'll read it to myself here. Most of the waterlogging is from draining of the higher ground to a low site. Okay, so so in that point in time, there is a lot of side hill seepage. So introduction of drainage higher up on your ground or your higher topography, especially on the side hills. So that's why we kind of call it like contour drainage. So I wish I could draw on the screen, but let's say you had some sort of a knoll or a hill. If you put multiple lines at a low grade across that hill, you will actually eliminate a lot of that water that goes to, and pools at that lower topography or lower elevation. So yeah, you're calling them interceptor tiles. So yeah, that essentially you'd put them throughout the hillside, and that gets rid of the moisture before it actually gets to the lower elevation.
Then Tom is asking, Joe, what clay contents are you working in? He feels that they're heavy clay. They need to use aggregate and some old plowing to handle it, not just tile.
Okay. So it's really hard to start comparing things around the world. I get that. So my question when I travel is I always ask folks, does the water permeate through the soil? Is it going to move through the soil? Because I have a lot of clay content in my soil. When I started, I was told by local experts, we'll use the air quotes, I guess, that my ground west of my main farm, there was no need to ever tile it. The tile would not work in that. They call it yellow clay, and it's really kind of the color of this dead grass in the picture here that you're looking at now. So it's a yellow sticky clay, and quite literally that's the farm that my son and I are looking at right now. And if we get it purchased, don't know if we will or not, but if we get it purchased, it'll be totally tiled before we ever plant it. I mean, it absolutely works perfect in that high clay content tile. Now, again, the water has to be able to permeate through. And like Michael said, it does come from the bottom up. The only thing the aggregate, in my opinion, helps you do, I think they said his name was Philip, is if you're going through a low spot, you're literally going through the lowest spot of the field, and it's a natural drain or sump. Yeah, you might be able to put aggregate in there to get the water to the pipe quicker just from that water hole. But I don't know that it's ever going to drain the sponge of the ground any quicker. We can all be proven wrong. Again, I'm not in your exact situation. Michael, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, and I'm trying to think of the CEC soils that we had down in the southern part of the states, because that was some of the heaviest clay I've ever worked in. And we were 5 meters apart, right? And we're still seeing a benefit. So I haven't come across, and it goes back to the spacing side. So 5 meters is pretty tight. I've seen people go down to that 3 meter mark and still naturally put more pipe underground, but it's taking that spacing because the water can't permeate through the soil faster than that. Right. So it kind of goes back to, I'm just trying to manage my water table and to get rid of excess moisture. And that's what kind of comes into play with those spacings. So a really heavy clay content, really heavy soil that you believe that you need aggregate in, it goes back to that aggregate still just draining essentially that little trench. It's not doing anything from the sidewall pressure. So that's when that spacing and depth comes into play.
And I, of course I get myopic. I only see what happens on my farm at a real, intense level. But I've traveled enough around and seen guys do exactly what you say, Michael. They're bringing it up in the soil profile, and they're using smaller diameter tile and putting it a lot closer, and getting huge benefits out of that. So, yeah, again, if it's the prevailing practice like we see in Europe, then that's what you're going to do, and we have a solution. We just don't see, even on my high clay content, and I don't have the highest clay content in North America. That would be actually north of Michael a little bit. They're not using aggregate either, and love the way tile handles that, and they call that blue clay. They can literally take that clay. I talked to a dairy farmer once that the ground he was tiling, they had to do some excavating and to get through a big hill. They literally rolled it out with a steamroller outside of a dairy barn, waited for a rain, and then they used it for a feeding floor for like 20 years. I mean, I was like, oh my goodness, that's some really heavy clay. And in fact, the county that is where these plows were built up until 5 years ago, the county name is Clay County. This isn't a joke. I mean, they make all the pottery in Indiana out of the soil in the county next to where I live today. So yeah, we've got really high clay content, and we're not using the aggregate.
One last thing, Joe. Robert Bell actually mentioned here, not a question, but he just said, we have run a trial with gravel, no gravel, sock, all the options, and have not seen a difference in the treatment so far. And that's in Western Australia. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
And how long, you said Robert was his name?
Yeah, Robert Bell. Yeah.
So Robert, how long has that study been going on? And he can type that answer, and you can tell us.
Yeah, and then Michael had another question here. Would like an opinion on a filter sock use in clay soil mainly? Michael, do you have any idea on that?
Yeah, so the filter sock's mostly used for your sandier soils. So the essentially your material in the ground can move a little bit faster. So, or I guess risk of movement into the soil or into the pipe. Sorry. So on our clay ground, we can actually get away with a larger perforation, a larger slot size. In your sandy ground, that's when you'd start talking about sock or fabric. At least for ADS, we have a perforation that's essentially like you took a razor blade and made a little slit. That can be utilized for clay and sandy ground. The only time we're really recommending sock is like a sugar sand, a little bit more coarse. So clay naturally's got a smaller particle size, but it bonds better, so you don't really have risk of intrusion into the pipe, especially if you can keep your grade at 1/10 or better. That keeps enough water movement where it takes any sedimentation with it. Once again, that was a long answer to a short question. So anytime you get into more of like a sugary sand, that's when you're going to use the filter or the sock. Everything else, you can either get away with a finer perforation size or just a regular large perforation that's common in the marketplace.
Yeah, and Joe, I'll let you kind of get back to your presentation, but Robert actually owns one of our plows in Australia, and he says it's 3 years, and we're actually doing our first demo over there when Ryan and Cody get over there. So
awesome! Well, thanks, Robert.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, I'm okay, Brian, answering questions. I mean, this is getting where these folks want to go.
Yeah, I think we're caught up at the moment. So if you want,
somebody might have to tell me where I was. I don't know. I think what I was talking about was that we've already talked about the ZD48 that goes 1.2 meters. The middle plow, what we call the 3-point plow, it's going to install 4-inch tile, which is 105 millimeters, 6, 8, and 10-inch tile by changing the boots, and we'll see the boots a little bit later. It's going to go 1.6 meters, 5.5 foot deep. It's going to go on a larger tractor that's got a 3-point hitch. Category 3 is what the hitch is set up for, and up to any kind of horsepower you want to put in front of that, no problem. And again, on those two plows, you're going to use your 3-point hitch lever inside the cab to control lowering it down in the start hole. And then once you get started into the soil profile and you've engaged the soil so it can't fall down anymore, then you just lower the hitch all the way, put it into float, more or less, so that hitch is just going up and down with no force up or no force down. And we're going to control the depth only at that point by putting oil in and out of the cylinders through the ag leader and teleslope, through the proportional valve. And you can kind of see, I can't point on here, but you can kind of see that proportional valve on those two 3-point plows. It's the little black cylindrical looking thing at the very front where the left control arm would be attached to the plow. Anyway, so that's how we're going to control depth on those two plows. We can go from, basically 120, 140 horse tractor up to a nice big 9 series Deere or a Steiger that's got a category 3-point hitch. The last plow to the right there is what we call our pull type plow. And that's going to hook onto a drawbar. It has a control box that comes with it, where we can move the wheels forward to lower the plow into the ground. And then again, once we've engaged the soil, there's a switch you're going to flip inside the cab on the control box, and those wheels will go to basically 200 PSI in the system, 250 maybe. It lets the wheels have enough down pressure that the plow wouldn't tip over, but not enough down pressure that it's going to affect the depth. So those wheels will actually ride up and over bumps or humps in the field if you're going across heavy stubble or stalks or existing ditches even. Those wheels are going to go down in the ditch, come back up, and the soil profile never changes grade. The shank literally stays exactly where it's supposed to stay. So the big highlight on this photo is all the plows achieve and maintain grade exactly the same way. And so what we want to do as FarmX or as Solmax is when we talk to you about buying a plow, we want to find out what your best tractor is to install that tile. And so Cody will ask you a lot of questions about what tractors you have on your farm. Are they tired? Are they, have the wheels on it? Or do they have tracks? What weight are they? Things such as that. And then we'll guide you to which tractor is the best. And then, okay, at that point, does it have a 3-point hitch? And if it does, quite possibly the 3-point plow is the one for you, except that the pull type does go, what's it go about? 0.3 of a meter deeper. I think it goes 1.9 meters compared to 1.6. Yeah, that's the difference. We don't care which plow you buy. We just want you to buy the right plow for your farm and for your tractor. So, yeah, I'm going to move on from that slide unless there's any questions, Brian. So our plows all have ZD in the name. What we've patented here in the U.S. is the zero deflection technology. If you look at the left, all of our competitors and our old plows, that's what they looked like. There was a nice long vertical shank going through the ground, the pivot point at the top, and then the tile would exit 2, 3, 4 feet behind the pivot point of the plow. And what happened was, as we made grade changes, as the nose of the plow came up or down, it would actually lower the back of the plow where the tile was coming out and create a pinch point, a crush or a hump. And so for years, they knew that was an issue. We knew that was an issue. We developed this plow in 2010, 2011, called the zero deflection technology. We moved the shank further forward. We got that exit point below the pivot point of the plow, so that now when we make grade changes, which IntelliSlope does this wonderful job of making constant grade changes through the soil profile, we don't change the depth of the tile out the back end, and we don't put humps, and we don't put crushes in it. The other thing this technology did for us as a byproduct was it actually made the plow pull easier. And we've done all kinds of testing with one of the tractors on my farm. We put load cells in the hitch, and we've proven that even compared to our old plow and all of the competition, this new plow pulls easier. And it's because nothing is going through the ground in a vertical sense. It's all got an angle pointed towards the back. And so it's doing, it's lifting the soil, fracturing it, and making it easier to pull. And the funny thing is, when guys come to me at farm shows, trade shows, they always tell me how easy our plow is to pull and how happy they are to buy it. And that's why people buy our plow. But the real reason they should buy it is because of the zero deflection technology, because we worry about how we bed that tile down in the ground, and we've made it so that there's no deflection when the IntelliSlope makes grade changes. So really important technology there, something you want to be really worried about, because obviously you can't see down there. You've got to have trust and faith that this thing is working right. And that's what we've done for you, is giving you that ability to trust the process, trust the plow. And we went through these slides a little bit earlier, so I'll just kind of breeze through them quick. But this is just giving you a little visual demonstration that we extend the cylinders to rotate the front up, and we retract the cylinders to rotate the nose down or the back towards the back. And that's how we control our depth or our grade. And this is talking about something I already talked about, is that the lifting action of this design plow is what makes it pull easier. And so we're going to look at another slide here pretty quick that shows all of the poly plastic that we put on the plow to make it even pull through the soil profile easier.
One thing to note, Joe, because I think there's a lot of different equipment out there that can install pipe, but with a plow, essentially you're just heaving the ground and the ground's falling back into its same place, right? So you don't have introduction of I guess subsoil, subclays up into your more organic matter materials. So that's something that's a positive about a plow.
Yep.
And naturally with the SoilMax plow, it pulls easier. And I think just seeing it out in the field, I think it heaves the ground better and it lays itself back down. It's I don't know if cleaner is the right word or not, but the soil disturbance I think is less, which is a positive.
Yep.
With your plows versus anything else out in the marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's what guys like about it. I mean, it's like we install tile in the spring before we plant, and some of those machines that take so much soil out and, mix it up. I mean, it's a real pain to go back and plant immediately. You really want to sit there all winter, in effect, to get it smoothed out. So this is our slide where we talk about the features of the plow that, that aren't obvious, I guess. One thing is the quick change boot design. We're going to look at some slides here in just a little bit of why that's so important, but we make it easy to change the boot. And the boot is what the tile goes through. And it's what shapes the size of the trench. There's 2 bolts that you're going to change, and the 3 main boot pieces come off, and they're sitting on pins. So you just, they fall away. They don't fall off. They just fall away. You pick them up, put the new pieces on, put the 2 bolts in, and that's done. Then when you see the 4th picture where it says narrow and poly slick, you can see that's our shear right there. And that shear gets changed every time you change the boot. We have a different shear for each of the 4 boots, or actually 5 boots, I guess. So we have a different shear for all 5 boots. And the reason that's important, we'll see in a couple of slides, but there's 4 bolts to change that. This whole process is so quick and so easy. It'll take longer to clean the mud out from underneath those 4 shear bolts than anything else. I mean, it's a really simple process to install different sizes of tile. And we want you to change that boot every time you change the size of tile. The second picture there is our power feeder that Cody can get shipped to you. Now that's going to keep drag off of the tile as it goes into the top of the boot. I'll let Michael speak to that a little bit, but the biggest enemy to the installation of tile is stretch. So we want to eliminate stretch at every point that we can. So we're going to recommend that you use a power feeder. And then the inside of our boot is square so that the tile's only touching it on 2 spots. And the spot that it always touches, the back part of the boot, we've lined it with poly plastic as well. So you've got plastic running on plastic. As close to friction-free as we can get. And you want to talk to me about tile stretch right here, Michael?
Yeah, and we'll see you made a couple good points. There's like that quick change boot design. The reason we want, if you get a 4-inch tile that you're installing, we want a 4-inch boot. And we'll see a picture of what that actually looks like after it's installed. But I need to have that sidewall support. So it's plastic. It's not concrete. So essentially your load rating. So with plastic, once you have a weight load on it, it's going to squat a little bit. And it's doing that to send your energy into the sidewalls. If you don't have sidewall support, meaning if you put a 4-inch through a 6-inch boot, you have too much void space, your pipe's actually going to deflect too much. And that's, you're paying for 4-inch tile to be oval or a round. We don't want to oval that out and risk any more deflection opportunity. So that's why we want, different boots for different size tile. And then, anything over 5% stretch is technically a pipe failure. So anything we can do to eliminate pipe stretch, getting the power feeder allows you to get the pipe off the ground quicker so you don't catch any plant material, and it assists it into the boot. That eliminates stretch, and then just that decreased friction in the boot design and stuff. All of these small things kind of come into play of, essentially we're making our product to withstand certain thresholds. SoilMax made a product that meets our standards and vice versa. I mean, they're all designed with a need in mind. And that's kind of why you see this plethora of different features on the screen.
Yeah. Then the last one we haven't talked about is the middle picture, the walking tandem. And it goes without saying probably, but that's only for the pull type plow. But that's a nice addition. Does a lot of different things for you. It smooths out the survey, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. It also makes the stance of the plow wider. So when you're backing over the start hole, it distributes that weight further away from the start hole and reduces the pressure by a factor of 2 because you got 4 wheels instead of 2. So very nice addition for pull type plows.
So while you're at the end of a slide, Joe, we've got a couple questions that have came up so far. Mm-hmm. One of them is from Andrew. He says that some of the tile is slotted and some of it has a hair-like substance. And what are each type used for?
Yeah, so I'm assuming the hair-like substance that I might have actual what our sock looks like, but it does have it's more of a clothy material. So that's what we call sock. That's used for that sugary sand. Just so regular perforation, essentially no exterior sock at all. That's used for more of your clay application.
Another one, Philip asks or says capillary rise is known to be about 4 feet. Do we need to get tile below that to be effective?
Yeah, so I'm pretty much the old thought process was, yes, to get it that deep. New studies and just new practices are showing 1 meter is pretty much the furthest I want it installed. I want sub 1 meter. We don't really need to get rid of moisture below that, just based on crop growth and crop health. We just need to get rid of that excess moisture. Like I said, sub 1 meter. Anything beyond that, we're getting rid of moisture that we could hold on, and it's not needed to get rid of that moisture at that level.
The last one is the 65 millimeter pipe is an option there in Australia. I want to know if that's equivalent to 3-inch. And Joe, I think you could answer this one on how we size our metric boots.
So the metric boots that we've sized because of the EU market is actually the ID of the tile. And so you'd have to help me out. Zook, what's our 3-inch? It's only 80, right? 80 millimeter.
Yeah, our 3 inches would be equivalent to 80 millimeter.
Yeah. And so that's actually an outer diameter of what would that be, Michael, on 3-inch tile, like 4.5 inches, something like that.
The 80 millimeter.
Yeah, but the outer diameter of it.
Yeah, pretty close. Yeah, because our 3-inch we consider 75 millimeter.
Mm-hmm. And we call it an 80 millimeter boot because we're
to answer the question, that 75 millimeter, if you get 65, I think you put in the comments that it makes it about 2.6 inches. I guess I'd be okay with 2.6. You get down to 2, there's not much room for error.
Mm-hmm.
Now, GPS doesn't allow for much error neither, and we do see some 2-inch installed here in the States. I'm talking more personal side. I wouldn't. So 2.6 would probably be the minimum. So I think you said it's a size option that you can get there. Sometimes you have to install what you have, right?
Yeah.
So I'd be okay with that. Sub that's when I would definitely go a little bit slower. If you got a pull type, invest in the walking tandems, just kind of make it a little bit smoother ride. There's just some things there that when you're surveying, take your time a little bit more. There's just 2 inches is not a lot.
Yeah. Anything else, Ryan?
Caught up for now.
Okay. So the next slide, this is where we start shaping our trench, and so we're gonna shape that trench so that we're touching the bottom of the tile, and then we're coming up like on a clock. If you're looking at a clock face, we're coming up at about 4.5, and we're coming up at about 7.5 on a clock face, if those numbers actually existed. But we're holding it in 3 spots to support it, like Michael said, so that energy can go out to the sidewall and down into the bottom of the tile, and it won't squat, won't become an oval, because the greatest area you're going to get out of that perimeter is a pure circle. Anything smaller than that, as you start squatting down to flat, is less volume that can get through there. So we want to keep it maintained as a perfect circle, a perfect tube to get that through there. And so that's why we're going to change that. The yellow part up there, is what's showing you the shear, the shape of the shear. That's why we're always going to change that anytime we change the tile diameter, so that we match that exactly. Here's an actual photo from a dig out close to Michael's house. This was freshly installed. You can see the tiles bedded all the way through. The sidewalls are touching the tile. That's going to stay perfectly round throughout its entire life. Not an issue.
No, and that goes back to, your product is installing it this way. The biggest thing I see in the field is your starter holes. So if you're digging with an excavator or backhoe, and that most of the time that's flat bottom, that's where you're going to have your issues.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mechanical error. I'm going to call it at that point in time. So the correction or the corrective action for that would be essentially you'd weld like a half moon onto your bucket or thumb or what have you to get that sidewall support. So like on a 4-inch tile, you're going to have a 4.25-inch half moon, right? And you're going to have it go all the way up to the midline. That'll give it enough sidewall support. If not, you're going to just have to do it a little bit by hand, just a common spade, get some nice clay material, pack it around the pipe, and that should give it enough sidewall support. But to Joe's point, you can see just what their plow does for that sidewall support to keep that round pipe.
And the other thing to really note there, Michael, any mistake you make bedding that tile where you've dug it out with a backhoe, you might as well make that mistake for the entire run of the tile, because every ounce of water has to go through that error that you put in there mechanically. If you do let that tile get squashed or crushed. Yeah.
And that's where, even when you're backfilling your starter holes, make sure you're crumbing it, they call it. So get the small soil particles around the pipe. Don't just take your excavator bucket and drop big clumps of hard material on it. That's going to cause an issue. And then one thing to note before I forget, it's a pet peeve of mine. After you install the pipe, let it naturally settle. Like, we don't want you to just run up and down it with your tractor tires. Essentially, you took a nice deep rip situation, made it compacted, got the opportunity for you to collapse that tile because there is a lot of air, a lot of void space after you run your plow through it. So let it naturally settle. Solmax has a great product, the Shaper Pro, which you'll see here in a little bit. That's a nice product to run over it and gets more of that particles down by the pipe, crumbs it up so the next time it rains, it naturally settles.
So one other question that just popped up is, what is the most popular pipe size? When talking about room for error, is that referring to larger pipe size, more room for plow to move around and not create spots for sediment to accumulate?
So the most popular pipe size is your 4-inch, like that 100 millimeter size. That's used throughout the whole nation. Over here, that's what your lateral spacings are. We do sell a fair amount of that 3-inch, the 75 millimeter pipe. So I didn't want to scare you away from that. Any pipe's better than no pipe, in my opinion. So if you can only get access to a certain size, definitely utilize that size. But 4-inch is the most common size we see over here. When I talk about the room for error, that's more just, we're talking this much. So that's why I always kind of reference, if we can get a larger diameter pipe, that's not necessarily I'm saying to carry more water. I'm just trying to alleviate some of that error opportunity.
Because let's even eliminate the plow from that question real quick, Michael. I've been doing this since 97 on my own farm, first with a backhoe, now with a Mini X. The biggest amount of error any tile project I do on my farm is at the start hole. That's where you dig it just a little bit too deep, or you dig it a little bit too shallow and you're trying to straighten it out. That's where literally, if you're off by a 1/2 inch, you can't tell it by eye, unless you're really, really good. That's some of those things that with 3 and 4 and 6-inch tile isn't as big a deal if you're off a 1/2 inch at the beginning of the start hole. You do that with 2-inch tile, you've taken out, a 1/4 of the diameter, which isn't a 1/4 of the flow, but you've taken out a lot of it. And I think that's the issue, is you just want to make really sure, if you're going to use that really small diameter pipe, everything you do down to the last hookup, everything is exactly perfect. There's just no room for doing it wrong.
No, and that's where the GPS comes into play. If you're utilizing laser, or I've seen a lot of people just say, I'm going uphill, right? I'm going to put the plow on an angle and go. Anytime you have any fluctuation in that pipe, you have a risk of sedimentation. Sedimentation causes pipe failure. Pipe failures cause drop in yield. So definitely, if you're going to do some drainage, look into the AgLeader GPS system, because I think it's proactive, not reactive, or whatever it may be there. So,
and we'll look at that here in a second. Some slides from it. Any other questions, Ryan?
No, we're caught up.
Okay. So this is kind of a summary of the actual plows, 120 horsepower tractor and up. Easy to hook up. I do want to fly back real quick. Sorry about this. The other thing to note is every plow we make has a second attachment point on if you need help with the first tractor. So we never want to see you hook one tractor to another tractor. That's just bad news. But let's say you've got to get through a little tough spot. It's slick, it's been raining, it's frosty, whatever. We have second attachment points on all 3 plows. So you're always going to run a cable from your extra tractor back to the plow, and it doesn't affect the grade any. It's not really showing up in that picture very well, but all 3 plows not only achieve and maintain grade the exact same way, but they also have a second attachment point to hook a second tractor to if it's slick or you do hit a tough spot. Again, I apologize for flying through these, but so then we get into the accessories. We make a cart to unroll the big rolls of tile. You're going to want something like this. The one we make is deluxe. We're the only cart on the market that has a actual heavy duty automotive brake to slow that turntable down. If you've ever had a turntable unspool tile on you, you'll understand why this is such a critical feature. And we control that brake hydraulically. We've got a wireless remote that Cody can get you. We make 3 different options of carts. And I don't have a slide of that, but we make a walking tandem option, which is very popular. We make a single axle that tows behind a pickup or a tractor. And then we do make a 3-point hitch model that can go on the back or front 3-point hitch of a tractor. LED brake lights so you can go down the road and be safe, and people won't hit you. There's the Shaper Pro that Michael was talking about, and I know we're getting tight on time, what we promised you guys, but we'll talk about this real quick. This is going to be something you can add to your tractor to go over the spoil that the plow leaves. You can kind of see here in front of that loader bucket, that's what it looks like after the tile goes through. Then behind the yellow Shaper Pro, that's what it looks like after it grinds it up, recenters all that spoil right over the trench. You get, let's say 4 to 6 inches of rain over the next couple of months. That trench is going to settle back down in, take all the air void out of where the tile was installed, and you're ready to farm. We're going to run one of those over every acre before we plant it. That's something we make. Cody can ship those right to you. They go on 1,000 RPM tractors. Biggest thing on that, you want something with a cab, just to keep the noise and the anything that might hit from flying around at you. So here's one of my favorite spots. We get to the IntelliSlope. This is made by Ag Leader, who's the parent company of SoilMax. This thing is super simple. It's my favorite part of selling plows is talking about the IntelliSlope. You literally, if you can answer 4 questions, you can install tile. If you look at this middle slide, and again, we don't expect you to stare into your screen real hard, but there's 4 questions down at the bottom. It's going to ask you, how deep do you want your tile? What's the goal? You want to be at 1 meter in Michael's instance. And then it's going to say, well, how deep is too shallow and how deep is too deep? So you could say 0.8 meters is too shallow and 1.2 is too deep. And then the 4th question is going to be, what's the minimum grade that you want? And you can say 0.1%, 0.2%, whatever, you can pick that. You're going to set basically an AB line. You're going to drive from where the tile ends to where it starts. So when you put a run of tile in, you're just going to go to the next pass, hit start survey, end survey when you get back to the start hole. Before you've ever put your tractor in reverse to back around and get in the hole, it's already got a solution figured out. And you might see that green checkbox on the screenshot that says plan. If that green checkbox is there, you've met all 4 of your parameters. You're going to be able to install the tile exactly the way you want with the 4 answers that you gave it. Hit the green checkbox, you go to that final screen, the install screen, and it's going to give you a monitor of exactly where you are on grade. If you're 1/10 of an inch off or 0 inches off, whatever. But the big thing to note is on that plan screen, if you can't get a solution for your 4 answers, there is no green checkbox. You cannot go forward from there. You either have to resurvey, drive a different path to get around a hump or through a swale, or at that point, you can change some of your answers and say, okay, well, for this particular run, I'm okay if I'm at 0.75 meters depth. At least I can control that. I know that. It's also going to tell you at what point that obstruction hits, or they don't call it obstruction. Anyway, they'll tell you where your interference is. It's at, 100 meters out is where you got a problem. So you can actually drive around that a different way and resurvey. All this goes right back to the control of what you can control on your farm, and not, if you've got somebody doing it for you, they might just hide it and change the numbers on you. You wouldn't know. This way you're controlling it yourself. Other thing to remember, I want to highlight this one more time. If you don't have a green checkbox, you can't go forward. It doesn't let you install tile in automatic. Wrong. It's going to do it only the way you want it. And if you can't meet those parameters, it won't let you go forward. This thing's so easy. When we brought it out, we had the first edition of it out on my farm doing some testing. And my dad wanted to get in and run it. He'd never been around IntelliSlope before. I was at a trade show. He harvested some soybeans early and wanted to get the tile in really quick. And we talked him through it on the phone. He'd never touched that screen before, was putting tile in within an hour. No problems. Now, he didn't know how to set A-B lines and stuff like that because we'd had steering for years. But he literally, we walked him through the screens, got it set up. He answered the questions, made a survey. He and my son and the hired hand were putting tile in an hour. That's how simple this screen is. And you got your friends at AgLeader to thank for that. They do a great job with this firmware, making it simple for farmers. So kind of the final highlight for my portion here, we've got the complete system for you guys. All of this is available through FarmX, through Cody and his partner Kyle. We've got the plow, the cart, Shaver Pro. They can get the IntelliSlope. All of it's backed by our warranty, or AgLeader's warranty. Tech support all comes through SoilMax. We're going to tech support the IntelliSlope for you, or Cody can support it as well. He's a trained dealer. He can help you out. But we've got email support. We got phone support. Whatever you need to make you successful, we're going to make that happen for you. Again, unmatched tech support. We're always continuing to, develop new products, and that's what we're proud of. So, Michael, I'm going to let you take it from here for just a little bit.
Real quick, guys, we had a few questions come in. Joe, do you talk about FlowX at all in this presentation?
I don't think so.
Okay.
We can.
So 2 of the questions are kind of related. The first one was, what are the tile layout design pitfalls? I know you talked about the different depths and spacings, but do you want to touch on the actual layout, making sure you're doing something that's going to work in the future and things like that?
Yep. So we have a product called FlowX that's available, where an engineer actually designs everything for you based on your soil type, based on your parameters that you answer. It's all done virtually, so it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter where the engineer is. They're going to be able to figure this out for you. Very important service. Again, I've installed tile since '97, maybe not always the right way because I was never trained like what we train people today. But when we were bringing FlowX out, we were doing a project on our farm, and I remember saying, man, we're going to have to outlet underneath the road, because in my mind, the low spot in the field was going to go through a township road. And when FlowX came back, that wasn't true. I'd farmed that ground for 20 years and thought that the outlet was going to have to go through a county road. And actually the outlet was hundreds of yards away, hundreds of meters away for anybody else, in a different direction. And even though I'd farmed it for 20 years, I didn't realize that actually the outlet was going to be somewhere else. That's just, and maybe that's me. Maybe I'm not the best observer of what's going on around me. But since that moment, I've never put in tile that I don't use this service called FlowX. I let an engineer design it. They came to me before on a big project where on 80 acres, they came up with a solution that didn't use the least amount of tile. They had a solution that used about 2,000 feet more tile, but had 50 less digouts on 80 acres. Well, digouts are where we lose our time. We're not good at digouts. I've already told you that's where some of the danger can be in getting something done wrong. When we had 50 less digouts and all we had to do was spend the money on 2,000 feet of tile, that was a unanimous vote on my farm. We bought the extra tile, did the fewer digouts. These are the things that an engineer can design for you and really make your life easier and have just a lot better experience and a lot less anxiety on designing that tile plan.
Yeah, and there's 2 things that I always see is undersized mains or overloaded mains, meaning everybody can design a drainage system based on just a 6-inch or an 8-inch boot. You just need to tell them that, because the biggest risk you have is if you only have a 4-inch boot, tying too many acres into just that one 4-inch line, you may have to run multiple mains. So I think that's a big thing to note is depending on whatever boot size you have, you can make a design. It just, you don't want to overload each diameter, I guess you could call it.
Yeah. Yeah. When I started tiling, I didn't have the horse or didn't have the didn't have the weight of a tractor to install big mains. So I installed a lot of 4 and 6 inch tile with just a lot of outlets. Now where I farm, that's easy because I don't have flat ground. I've got hills and hollers and lots of places to outlet. So I did a lot of 4 inch outlets and they work perfect today. Just a lot more, probably less efficient, right, Michael? I mean, doing a lot of that, but if it's what you got, it's what you got. Like you said, tiles in the ground, that's what counted. Oh, we lost Michael. So this is where he usually presents that there's different types of tile that can come from your supplier. What you want to do is have a good relationship with your tile supplier. You want to understand what options they have. Ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. Why do they have the options that they have? Why do they have the slot pattern that they have? And find out what fits your soil. And thank goodness Michael's back so he can finish that slide out.
No, I apologize. All of a sudden I started talking and I disappeared. So I apologize for technical difficulties. But no, I mean, this is just goes back to there's a product out there for your needs, whether it's a lift station, single wall pipe, dual wall pipe, whatever you may be. And we have shipped products overseas. So don't be concerned too much about just the distance between me and you. We can get you a product if you can't find it locally. So yeah, let's see what else was on there.
Kind of on your product there, Michael. One of the questions was, what would you suggest for a minimum gradient?
Yeah, so 10th grade. So anything under a 10th, you do have a risk of sedimentation. If you said, Michael, I've only got a little area that I had a 10th, and then I went to half a 10th for 60 meters or something, I'm not going to tell you not to put the pipe in the ground. It's just maybe something to note on a map of, hey, this is at a lower grade, or this is a little bit shallower depth. But the good rule of thumb is a 10th grade for sedimentation concerns.
And then following up on that, Andrew asked, if you're on the minimum gradient, what would your maximum distance that you would lay pipe based off minimum gradient?
So there's a couple different variables that go into that. So the pipe can only handle so much water. So a 6 inch on a 10th grade can only go so far. We do have a app on Apple and Android services that I think is just ADS resources. You can put all that stuff in there and it'll actually tell you if you ran out to, if you ran too far for what that grade showed you. But the reason I say that, there's a couple different variables. If we're talking like 4 inch laterals, you could always tighten your spacing up, meaning if you went 300 meters, you might at 40-foot spacing, that pipe might have already filled up with too much moisture. But if you took it down to 30 feet, the amount of acreage, the amount of water that's getting divided into each individual line is less. So you could actually go further. So there's a couple different ways to figure that of, yes, you'll eventually run out. 200 meters at a 10th grade 4 inch tile, you're not going to run out of pipe capacity. But eventually you will. So that does kind of come into play. And that's kind of why I do promote just drainage designs prior to going to the field. If you have a line to run here and there, great. But those things are predetermined with the design.
Yep.
Everything from the size of the pipe to distance to depth to spacing, all of that's predetermined. So you're able to go to the field and do the fun thing, which is putting pipe in the ground.
Yeah, one thing I like to say about FlowX, and I'm not joking, the guys that are on this call know this is absolutely true. I say it's a family saver because my dad and I have been in more arguments about where to outlet tile, what grade to run, all that kind of stuff. And using FlowX takes all that anxiety and all that emotion out of it because we know it's a good plan. And my dad and I are two hard-headed guys, so we butt heads about that stuff. Maybe everybody on this call isn't like me and my family, but I think Floex is a great family saver. So that's my 2 cents for that product.
Yeah, and I did just throw in there. It's just Agricultural Drainage Resources. It's an app for smart devices. You can Google stuff online. You can do some quick calculations to see how far each pipe will go till it fills up.
So, and another thing to know is when you're using IntelliSlope, that minimum gradient that you're going to put in there is just that. It's a minimum. If the slope of the land allows for it, it will go more slope than what you put on the minimum. So if your natural slope is 0.5% and the ground is a smooth transition, your pipe is going to be put in at 0.5% slope.
Right. That's not a guarantee. It's a guarantee it won't go lower than that, but it's not guaranteed that's the only slope it's going to put in. That's the difference between IntelliSlope and a laser. I mean, Michael referred to this earlier. Lasers were great when I started, but they are reactive. They only make a change to the plow when you get off, when you're off grade. Where IntelliSlope, you've already made that survey. It knows where the humps, it knows where the bumps are, it knows if it's going to have to make a change 50 feet from now. And so it will. And that's the awesome part of the product that Ag Leaders brought for us, is a proactive instead of a reactive system. And again, like you said, there's no calculations involved on your part. If you say, I don't want to go below 1/10, that's fine. But if 0.5 is what it's going to be at, or 1.0, that's where it's going to run all the time if that's what the slope is. Far different than a laser system.
Yeah.
So next question is from Tom. Do you guys ever have to use high-pressure drain cleaning units like you see frequently in Europe? I know those guys sometimes have enough silt to block drains almost yearly.
Yeah, we've seen some jetting services here in the States that remove yes, for sedimentation, but the biggest thing we have over here is a fungus essentially called iron ochre that fills up the perforations. They got to run a jetter through that to remove that. So, we do have circumstances where somebody's running a high pressure system. The only thing I don't want you to have is essentially to pressurize our full system. So I can't put more than, let's say, 11 PSI to my drainage system without blowing fittings and without blowing your perforate. Essentially, you'd have too much pressure at all times, not just circumstances of cleaning out, but it would push too much pressure out to the perforations and cause a suction event and bring more sedimentation in. But for what you're asking, that is common. So there's no risk of having issues just getting rid of the sedimentation through jetting surfaces.
How common is that, Michael? I mean, I've never experienced it. So,
yeah, I mean, I call it common, but in certain regions, like that iron ochre is close to where I'm at. If you didn't jet it out, every 5 years you'd be replacing your system. It just seals up the pipe that much. Mm-hmm. So it's geographically dependent, I'd call it. But there's times where even larger ag mains, they might jet something out to tree roots, debris, sedimentation.
Yeah, and that's one thing I noticed when we were in the UK last year was a lot of the jetting services. Yeah, they're cleaning out the silt, but that silt is typically from roots that have got into the pipe and blocked it off and collected the silt. So the main thing they're doing is getting rid of the roots so that the water can flow more naturally. Okay, next question. Philip asks, instead of dig outs, can we drop the outlet into a natural drainage channel, creek, gully, river?
Yeah, you could outlet wherever you want to outlet. The one thing to note is if you're using like a stick pipe for your outlet, you'd want 2/3 of that pipe. So if you're using just a stick pipe for your outlet, I need 2/3 of it in the embankment, 1/3 into the river, gully, whatever. That's so you don't have any option for that pipe to get ripped out and go down the river system. But Yeah, I mean, we have that quite frequently. People just dropping the boot in and either having their 4-inch just dangle into the water, which is not as likely or cosmetically pleasing. So we always like to see some sort of outlet structure or outlet pipe that's more rigid. But yeah, that's common as well.
One thing to keep in mind when doing that, though, is every time you have an outlet into a ditch or creek or gully, you really need a rodent guard on there so the animals don't climb up your pipe. So the more outlets you have, the more of those you have to maintain.
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good point. That's the last thing you want as a creature to climb up in your drainage system.
It's not good, is it?
No.
Last question that we have right now from Brendan. He says he came in late. Not sure if it's been spoken about. Does the pipe have to be put in straight, or can it be curved to follow a gully, low point, etc.?
So, yeah, we're not going to want to make a hard turn. If you look at the shape of the bottom of that plow, it's massive as far as, it's broad. So you're not going to want to, hit the left brake on your plow and turn 90 degrees. You don't want to do that. But if you're following like a natural waterway, what I kind of call a cow path or a snake path, something like that, we can make gentle curves. It's okay. And IntelliSlope will figure out how to, get the slope right and all that. That's all fine. But if you need to make a hard turn right or left, something like that, I'm going to recommend you just go past where you need to make the turn, pull the tile out of the ground, or pull the plow out of the ground, dig a new start, and put a T in and change direction. But yeah, if you're just making something that's wavy like this, yeah, we're going to be able to do that all day long. But you just don't want to make a hard turn. It's too much steel in the ground that's wanting to go straight, and you're trying to turn it, 45 degrees or 75 degrees, and you're just going to end up not happy with what happens.
And that also goes back to the control system you're using. So if you're using a laser, you're going to be limited to pretty much straight runs without having to actually move your laser itself. But the beauty of IntelliSlope is it's going to calculate grade no matter what your heading is.
Right.
So that's all the questions we have for now.
So I think, do we have our contact information on there, Michael?
Yeah. And when I cut out, I don't know if you touched on it or not, but we just have it on here, utility locator, recalls, and anything that's local approvals, watershed determination, those kinds of things. Keep that in mind. You just don't want to get yourself in a pickle.
Yeah. Well, especially so in North America, it's called 811. It's a service we can call to find underground utilities. We're very serious about that. I'm not sure what the service is going to be locally for you folks. I'm sure they've got something. You want to make sure you do that. You don't want to hit an underground utility. The worst case scenario is somebody gets killed. Best case scenario, you interrupt utilities to somebody else and everybody's angry with you. Get those located so you know where they are. Let's be safe. Let's do this responsibly. We take that very seriously, both of our companies. Excuse me.
Yeah, and I apologize. I had a Tom, which is the other rep for Solmax on here, but yeah, this is the contact information for myself and Joe, as well as our websites. So feel free to reach out to myself or get with Cody, and Cody can get us in touch and go that route. So yeah, if there's any other more questions, feel free to throw them in there. But otherwise, we appreciate listening to us. And learn
thanks for the
bit.
questions. I mean, there's times we do these and don't get questions. This was awesome tonight. Seriously, awesome to have 15 questions.
Yeah, one last thing, Cody, I don't know if you're able to hop on and kind of share the demo days. Was that discussed at all?
No. So me and Ryan Zook from Sorrelmax, we'll be coming over, I think 2 weeks now. We'll be over there starting in Western Australia and making our way over to Victoria. We're going to be hosting some field days. I think Robert Bell mentioned one of his, which will be in Elgin. And then we're doing another one in Kojanup. Sorry if I'm butchering these names too. Kojanup will be on March 15th, and then we'll go over to Esperance for March 16th. And then we'll be making our way over to Victoria for some demos over there in Warrnambool and Hamilton. So I'll be sure and send out a follow-up email to everyone in here that'll have the sign-up page and all that stuff.
Excellent. Well, if there's no other questions, looks like maybe Robert's typing, but really great conversations tonight, everybody. I appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully you all can attend some demo days and learn even more about how to do water drainage on your own. So thanks, everybody. Robert, I'll wait and see if you have something to type here. I don't want to end it before that.
Yeah, just I'll briefly talk here just for a second while you're waiting, Brian. But certainly, if you need to get a hold of Cody, do that. But you've got me and Michael's information on there as well. We're more than happy to engage with you and help get you comfortable with this product. And we've got nothing but good things to say about Cody and Farmex. I mean, they are great dealers for us and have got it worked down to a science how to sell and support all around the world. So we're very happy with that partnership we have with them. And so I think you can have full confidence this is going to work out just fine for you once you see it work.
Yep, absolutely. And thanks, Robert. Robert was just noting that Kojanup and Esperance is quite a drive. And then Philip just said that he would join Bell's demo day. So that's great. Yeah, I appreciate everybody. Thanks a lot. And there'll be a recording that is being sent to you of this, so you can actually go back and watch it again. Share it with friends as well. It's out there for everybody to be educated. So you'll be getting that here when we end. And yeah, thanks a lot, everybody. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.